Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninja speaking. For this particularly festive episode of the show, we're going to be taking a look at the Demoniacal Fit True Believer figure, which, in a rather fitting turn, is a bit of a clone or copy of the S.H. Figuarts Zamasu figure, which, for those that aren't familiar, is a Premium Bandai only release, meaning that you really could only get this as kind of an online order item. Couldn't get this through your regular brick and mortar, and it's supposed to be a more limited issue. So in this case, as we're taking a look at the clamshell to see what the figures include, I can kind of guess the DF figure, as being a clone there, is a more accessible version of the Premium Bandai release, but with a few extras thrown in. It is worth noting, as we kind of take a look here, the differences are a bit noticeable right away, taking a quick look at the instructions by the way, in that the clone figure, on top of having a few different pieces in there, just because of added features that they do tend to do over there with a really mad Marco setup, also is noticeably different in terms of its color scheme. In terms of general height, they are standing at about the same. I'm going to say just a little over 5.5 inches from the top of the hair. Although, the actual layout of the kind of the head and the faces here, in this case the neutral ones are a bit off, I would say, on the clone figure. It's a bit of a odd shape there, and you can actually say the same about the hair in that case. They are very similar looking, mind you, but they're not perfect copies, as it turns out. The color scheme is probably the most distinct thing between the two figures. Just for note, I'm going to keep the DF figure, the Demoniacal Fit figure, on the left, and the real one on the right, which is the one I have in my hand right now. And as we're taking a quick look at the articulation here, we're looking at what the original one has to offer. And as you see from the clone figure, it is mostly the same there, although if anything, I feel the figure was actually a little more stiff, if anything. Although it's worth noting that in terms of the overall figure itself, both of them, because of they having the same kind of boot cut, actually have quite a bit of trouble actually standing up, which is a bit annoying. And if anything, I find maybe the toes on the clone figure being a little looser. In terms of the general quality of the joints themselves, mostly about the same. Maybe the clone figure here is a bit more rough in spots, but for the most part, they are fairly identical. Color-wise, you can kind of see the DF figure actually reminds me a bit more in terms of the color scheme closer to the Dragon Stars figures, which might be appropriate given that I think the Dragon Stars toy was actually more readily available before the official Zamasu figure came out, so they wouldn't have had it to compare to when they actually made this clone figure. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, in terms of the joints for the head and the hands, wrist joints themselves are roughly about the same, so those parts will be interchangeable. However, the head joints are a little bit different. The DF figure actually has something that's a little closer to the kind of modified joint that is used for the Jiren figures and a few others, whereas the real figure uses a bit of a more standard ball joint. So it is worth noting that they aren't going to necessarily be compatible. Speaking of differences, you'll notice here with the real hair bit, or the real original figure, I should say, that the hair bits are pretty much only including one with the base head, and you are meant to kind of interchange in between the figures. However, for the Demoniacal Fit figures, the heads that are attached to that one have individual pieces, or I should say have alternate haircuts, or the hair pieces included for each and every one, and they're actually kind of glued into place, I should say. I did notice a little bit of shine of what I imagine was some sort of super glue to hold it together. Looking at the expressions themselves, aside from the kind of more neutral face, they're fairly close, not quite perfect things. I'd say maybe the Demoniacal Fit figures in this case, as I realize I kind of flip them back and forth as I'm doing this display, they tend to be maybe a little bit narrow in terms of the head, but they're not completely off. Maybe the faces are a little scrunched up if anything, but they're fairly reasonable in terms of the representation. It is worth noting though, color-wise, once again, there is a bit of a difference. The green skin tone on the Demoniacal Fit figures are a bit more pale than anything. In terms of the hands, detailing-wise, the Demoniacal Fit figures do have a bit softer details, and if anything, the hands are also, to help tell the difference, a little bit larger, if anything, on top of the slight changes in the skin color. In terms of the actual joint things, well, the clone figure is a little more rough around the edges, but they're still very serviceable, I would say. All in all, you can kind of tell that they're definitely, one is based off the other one, but they're not perfect recreations. Namely, that also it's worth noting that the plastic on the Demoniacal Fit, one on the left in this case, is a bit shinier overall, not just on the hands on there, but overall body. What the original figure doesn't have would be these effect bits, in this case an energy blade that's on the side there, which I believe it's kind of reused from the Goku Black figure in this case, and made to fit here, but it's worth noting that this would actually be compatible with the original figure as well. It's a bit of a looser fit, if anything. You have to push it really a little further down the hand in order to get there, but if you really want to include that on the original figure, it is something you can do. Now, what the new figure, or the clone figure, has that the original figure does not, would be these alternate sets of hands, which are really meant for the other display feature, or the other display case for the figure, which is basically turning into Goku Black, only using his original uniform rather than the more Goku-ish one. So in that case, you have both the alternate hands, in this case an included set of fits, as well as that little neck piece. Proof of concept, by the way, of that energy blade. This is what it looks like on the original figure. This is the Premium Bandai version. As you can see, looks nice. Honestly, a very good fit. Now, here's a quick look at something that isn't included on the instructions of how to switch bits, like the hands were on the earlier bit there, and that's how to switch the neck piece, I would say. Namely, once you pull it off there, which I found is easier if you remove the whole neck bit, you basically have to soak the whole thing in hot water to get everything on there, and kind of pull it off there. They did something very similar with the Figuarts Zamasu figure for the original one, and you basically need to pull it apart in order to pull off the inner neck piece. Now, it's worth noting here, as you see me assembling with the skin-colored neck piece, that as I'm going to pretty much force the other bit on there, it turns out they kind of messed up and didn't include this in the instructions. The head piece for the Goku Black head actually uses a standard neck peg. So basically a round bit, so you actually have to pull the little circular bit off the top here, which as you can see is now removed in the clip here, in order to actually make use of the alternate head. So now that we have that on there, I'll probably be heating this up there, but I'm going to try to do this on camera as is. You'll be using a little pressure to kind of slip it on there. It isn't too much trouble, but I would probably advise soak this in hot water like I did in order to make the initial switch to make this a lot easier. I'm just doing this because I wanted to try to capture this on camera. Not my smartest idea, but it does work in this case. Now, in terms of how the new face looks on there, I'd say the eyes are a little close together in this instance, it looks like, but otherwise, it's actually not very bad. It's a reasonable looking fit. And it's once you get that on there, you can see it takes a little pushing, but you can get that on the main body without too much hassle. It looks like a reasonable fit, and it's a nice way, if you have the original figure, to kind of have a different looking alternate on there, in case you wanted to have a look with Goku Black before he switched into your more standard gi look. Now, in terms of how that works, the neck moves around just fine, and the wrist joints on this one, honestly, they are a little snug, I find, a little hard to move at times, but they are very functional. All in all, is this a good substitute for the original figure? Yeah, it's not too bad. If you don't mind it deviating for a little bit, namely some of the heads and faces you can see weren't exactly perfect fits, and the colors are definitely a bit off, but all in all, it is a reasonable representation, especially if you didn't want to pay the original Premium Bandai price, which, for this figure, which was actually really bare bones, I honestly feel like I overpaid for the original. So, if you're looking for a cheaper alternative, you could certainly do worse. Would it be something where, now that I think about would I have picked this up on its own again? If it wasn't for this video, probably not. But even with this one with the new bits, it's still a pretty bare bones figure if I'm being totally honest. Well now folks, hopefully you're doing well and finding ways to enjoy the holidays. As for me, even though it's Christmas Eve, I got some more video editing to do because we have at least 2 other toys to talk about, not to mention something I just got in my mailbox today on Christmas Eve of all things. So, take care for now. Happy holidays to all, and catch you all later.